When the Civil War began in 1861, the full-dress uniform for infantry consisted of a dark blue frock coat, dark blue trousers, and the model 1858 dress hat. The frock coat, originally adopted by the U.S. Army in 1851, was single-breasted with the collar and cuffs trimmed in sky blue, which was the color of infantry. Brass shoulder scales, introduced for infantry in 1854, were worn on the frock coat for dress occasions. The black waist belt had a model 1839 brass oval plate showing the letters US. The dark blue trousers were introduced in 1858, and the shoes were black leather. The model 1858 dress hat, which was nicknamed the Hardy hat, was adopted for all branches of the U.S. Army in 1858. For the infantry, it had a brass hunting horn, which was a symbol of infantry in the U.S. Army. The hat also had a brass regimental number and company letter. The regimental number was to be placed within the loop of the horn, and the larger company letter above the horn. The infantry had a sky blue cord around their hats. For infantry, the left side of the hat was looped up with a brass plate depicting an eagle, and on the right side an ostrich feather was attached. In the field, the shoulder scales were rarely, if ever, worn. Rank was shown by sky blue chevrons above the elbow on the sleeve of the frock coat. On the trousers, rank was also shown, with corporals having a half-inch sky blue welt and sergeants and above having an 1.5-inch welt. Non-commissioned officers ranked above sergeant wore scarlet sashes under their belts. The NCO ranks also wore a different type of belt plate, the model 1851 belt plate, which depicted an eagle in brass and had a silver wreath. In the field, the model 1858 forage cap was usually worn instead of the dress hat. The forage cap was adopted in 1858 as a practical form of headgear for troops in the field, and this would go on to be the most well-known piece of uniform worn by Union troops in the Civil War. The forage cap was made in different styles during the war, with a common second type made with a larger top disc and a more cylindrical body, as well as with a squared visor. There's not a whole lot of information I could find, but it seems that the first type with the smaller disc and rounded visor was the original shape adopted in 1858, with the second version being made during the war. Some refer to the second type as a model 1861 forage cap, but I can't find any source saying that this was an official designation. Instead of the frock coat, a simple sack coat was usually worn. The sack coat was adopted in 1857 for wear in the field. The simple sack coat could be produced cheaply and more quickly than the frock coat. This, along with it being very practical, made it the most common uniform worn by U.S. infantry in the Civil War. Rank chevrons were also put onto the sack coats, but the higher-ranking NCOs did not always wear their scarlet sashes when in the field. Regulations had allowed for the company letter from the dress hat to be attached to the front of the forage cap when in the field, though this does not seem to have been a common practice. While the dark blue trousers were worn early in the war, in battles such as the Battle of Bull Run, this would change. In December of 1861, the dark blue trousers were changed to sky blue, though sometimes the dark blue ones were still worn until supplies ran out. The reason for this change may have been a cost savings measure for the dye used for dark blue. The forage cap, dark blue sack coat, and the sky blue trousers would be the uniform worn by most U.S. infantry in the Civil War. The colors were reversed on the new sky blue trousers for showing rank, with the welts now being dark blue. For rainy or cold weather, a sky blue overcoat was worn. Some non-standard overcoats in colors such as dark blue were worn as well. The forage cap also had a waterproof cover that could protect it in wet weather. As mentioned before, regulations allowed for the company letters from the dress hat to be attached to the front of the forage caps, but oftentimes any or all of the brass insignia was attached, as many troops did not wear or got rid of their dress hats. The brass insignia was usually placed on the top of the forage cap instead of on the front. Non-standard insignia was also worn on the forage cap, and with some states such as New Hampshire producing their own insignia for their troops. New Hampshire adopted silver regimental numbers and letters, with the letters NHV for New Hampshire Volunteers displayed along with the regimental number and company letter, as well as different types of hunting horns. There were many different styles of brass displayed on forge caps that came from a variety of sources. A brass ventilator was also made that could be attached to the forge cap, as seen on the figure on the left. A common alternative to the model 1858 forge cap was the McDowell cap, named after General Irvin McDowell, who was known to have worn it. Apparently, this cap was based off of the forge caps that were then in use by the Austrian army. It was taller and had a curved visor that sloped downwards. Another alternative to the forge cap was a French-style kepi, commonly called a McClelland cap or a chasseur cap. General George B. McClelland had advocated for its use by the U.S. Army after serving as an observer in the Crimean War, where he had seen it worn by French troops. Like with the forge cap, these caps were oftentimes adorned with insignia as well, both standard issue and non-standard. Some units wore their Model 1858 dress hats in the field, with the feather and oftentimes pieces of the insignia removed, as seen here with the 2nd Wisconsin Infantry, which was part of the famous Iron Brigade, where strict officers mandated that the dress hats be worn in the field. This regiment also continued to wear their older dark blue trousers at least into 1862, along with white leggings. Sometimes dress hats were pinned up on the right side against the regulations, or were left unpinned. The hats were also often beat and bent into shapes that were more comfortable to wear in the field. Various types of brimmed slouch hats were worn as well, such as the plug hat. Brimmed hats such as these were very common in the Western theater, as opposed to the Eastern theater where the forge cap was dominant. It should be noted that even though uniforms based off of the U.S. Army regulations were the most common uniforms worn by the Union Army, the vast majority of units were state volunteers and state militias. Oftentimes, individual states would adopt uniforms for their troops, with one of the most well-known examples of this being the Model 1861 jacket, which was adopted by the state of New York. This jacket was single-breasted with a standing collar and shoulder straps. Many New York troops uniformed by their state also wore waist belt plates with the letters S and Y for State of New York. This is just one example of many different state uniforms of the Union Army. The huge variety of uniforms in the Civil War, particularly early in the war, would be too much to cover in a single video, and I plan on covering them in future videos. In March of 1863, corps badges were introduced and were commonly worn throughout the Union Army in the second half of the Civil War, in battles such as the Battle of Gettysburg. Each corps was given a unique badge shape, and the color of the badge identified which division that particular unit was a part of within each corps. Red was for the 1st Division, white for the 2nd Division, and blue was for the 3rd Division. These were usually worn on the top of the forge cap, but sometimes they would be worn on the side of the forge cap. The corps badges were also worn on other forms of headgear such as the tall McDowell caps, and the regiments of the Iron Brigade wore them on their dress hats. They were also commonly worn on plug hats and were sometimes even worn on the front of uniforms. That is a general outline of uniforms worn by U.S. infantry during the Civil War. But as mentioned before, the various uniforms worn by state militia and volunteer units will be covered sometime in future videos. Anyway, thanks for watching.